So Nigeria's internal security crisis is no longer just a domestic issue. It's become a high-stakes battle for influence in Washington, according to the UK-based Africa Confidential, a respected newsletter that's built a global reputation for original reporting and analysis of key political and security developments across Africa. As competing narratives over violence and claims of a Christian genocide gain traction in the US, the Nigerian government and Biafran secessionist groups are now locked in an aggressive lobbying war, each seeking the attention and support of President Trump. According to Africa Confidential, alarmed by President Trump's threat last November to go into Nigeria guns a-blazing, the Tinubu administration has moved quickly to counter separatist claims, signing a multi-million-dollar lobbying contract with a Republican-linked firm to shape U.S. policy on visas, military cooperation, trade, and religious freedom. The scale of Abuja's effort far outweighs that of the pro-Biafra groups, who are also lobbying Washington, pushing for sanctions, diplomatic recognition, and even future military and oil agreements. So what's really at stake in this foreign lobbying battle? And how could it shape Nigeria's security, sovereignty, and international standing? Well, for more on this, I'm joined now on the line from London by Patrick Smith, Editor-in-Chief of Africa Confidential, and is also Editor-in-Chief of the Africa Report, a monthly African politics and business magazine. Patrick, thank you very much indeed for joining us. You're a very busy man, so we appreciate your taking the time to talk to us, and a very happy new year to you. And your reporting suggests Nigeria's security crisis is now being fought not just at home, but in Washington. I mean, how unusual is it for an internal African security issue to escalate to this level of what I might call US lobbying warfare?
Yeah, greetings, Charles, and Happy New Year to you and all your viewers. It's actually par for the course within the American system. The lobbying issue, the lobbying operations in the US are very much part of the political bargaining system there. You know, for example, I can give you the case of a senior State Department official who was backing the UNITA separatist movement in Angola under Jonas Savimbi. And if you remember way back in the 1980s, the CIA was backing Jonas Savimbi. Then the MPLA won the elections in 1992. This guy left the State Department, set up a lobbying firm, and then started backing the MPLA. And he was paid $1 million a year to run a website for the MPLA. And that's often the case. And I think the problem with this lobbying business is it's a sort of privatization of diplomacy. And it downgrades the real decision makers and the state, and it downgrades accountability. And I think that came out very strongly when US President Trump made his threats about going into Nigeria guns a-blazing. And suddenly the government in Abuja had to react really quickly, appoint ambassadors, not just to the US and UK, but several other countries, and then start this kind of negotiation with the US officials.
So, I mean, I lost you there for a minute, but what specifically triggered the sudden scramble for influence in Washington? Was it President Trump's comments or something deeper that's been building for years?
I think it was manifold, Charles. I think it was, first of all, the threat of the US deciding to make Nigeria a target and threatening military action. And I think there are also bad memories among the Tinubu loyalists of what happened 10 years ago under President Goodluck Jonathan, when the kidnapping of the Chibok girls became an international cause célèbre. And in the lights of many at the time, that was one of the government's failures on that was one of the reasons why Goodluck Jonathan lost that election against Muhammadu Buhari. And I think the Tinubu campaign team saw that coming down the road and thought we must move really fast on this. So I think on that score, it had an effect. And I think also, as you said in your intro, you've had this long-running lobbying campaign by the Biafran lobbyists demanding action because Christians are being targeted in Nigeria because that's its sort of core element. It's got quite a lot of traction with the religious right in the US, and that's really helped it in terms of getting that profile. So I think that the Tinubu administration thought we must counter this. We must counter it, both what's happening in the Trump administration and we must counter the narrative of the Biafran secessionists.
And of course, as you said, Patrick, claims of a Christian genocide have been gaining traction in US political circles. I mean, from your investigations, how accurate or misleading is that framing of Nigeria's security crisis?
Well, everyone we've spoken to, including people in the US, but I mean, the most authoritative sources are obviously going to be coming from civic groups in Nigeria. And the view we've been getting is that there's a major security crisis in Nigeria. And I think the ACLED security trackers have said over 10,000 people were killed in violent attacks last year, which is a kind of low-level conflict level. I mean, if you think about the number of people that have been killed in Ukraine or Sudan, you're heading up to those sorts of figures. But that is across the board. That is Muslims, that is Christians, that is people of other faiths, and indeed atheists. I mean, every person, every citizen could be subjected to this violence. And I think that's the point, that it's not a targeted against one particular faith. Everyone is tied up in it. And I think it's had more resonance, shall we say, in the US, where the religious right and the Christian lobby groups are extremely powerful. And that's why it seems to have taken flight as a kind of propaganda meme that's gone out and it's pushed the government into acting.
I was just going to, I mean, you've kind of answered the next question I was going to ask you, which is why has this narrative resonated so strongly in parts of the American political system, particularly among sort of conservatives and evangelical audiences? So let me move on from that, because your newsletter, Africa Confidential, and as we've been discussing here, reports that the Tinubu administration has signed an expensive contract with a Republican-linked lobbying firm. I mean, what exactly is Nigeria trying to influence in Washington? Is it policy? Is it perception? Is it protection from sanctions? I know you sort of touched on it briefly, but if you could expand on that a bit.
I think that's that's the nub of the issue, Charles. Why so much money and why now? Because after President Trump made his statement, then National Security Advisor Nuhu Rabadu went to Washington with his intelligence staffers, and they met Peaks Hegseth and the U.S. Chairman of the Chiefs of Staff. They had a very high-level meeting 3 weeks after Trump's statement, and then they got into these negotiations about what security help Nigeria could get from the US. And it's nothing to do with lobbying. And that's what's a bit of a puzzle. Rabadu didn't need a lobbyist to open the door to meet Hegseth. He organized that through Nigeria's diplomatic channels. And a lot of people I've spoken to on the Nigerian side and the US side say, there's a number of extremely talented diplomats within the Nigerian system. And they're the people that should be called into action on this because they have a lot more credibility. They come from the country. They speak the languages. They know the issues. They know the political nuances in all this. and they would be far more effective than engaging foreign lobbyists. And the lobbyists are going to do, a bunch of things, but the main thing is they're going to do is open a door to meet the top American officials. But it seems that Ribado was able to do that without hiring a lobbyist at the time.
So, in that regard, does this kind of lobbying signal diplomatic weakness, or is it simply the reality of sort of modern international politics?
It's something everyone is doing. I mean, that is states across Latin America, states across Africa and Asia, and states across Europe tend to lobby U.S. officials. I guess you could argue one thing the lobbyists could help with would be U.S. Congress. Now, there are about $350 million worth of armaments which the U.S. is meant to be supplying Nigeria to help on the counterterrorism campaign and all the rest of it. That stuff has got stuck in Congress under Joe Biden because the Nigerian military didn't meet their strictures on accountability and protection of civilians and so on. So I suppose that's one thing the lobbyists are going to do, which is to press U.S. Congress to release that money and to release those arms, for which Nigeria is going to pay, $1/3 billion. And you've got to ask yourself, with the transactional nature of Donald Trump's government, that's selling arms to Nigeria is going to be probably easier under the present U.S. administration than it was under the Biden administration, with its various strictures on who buys arms and what they use them for.
Indeed. And of course, on the other side, looking at the brilliant article that Africa Confidential wrote, on the other side, Biafra-linked groups are also lobbying Washington, calling for sanctions, recognition, and even future military and oil deals. I mean, how seriously are these groups being taken in U.S. policy circles?
Well, serious enough that you've got people like Ted Cruz, who is the conservative senator who chairs the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He's a big supporter of the Biafra government in exile. He's a big supporter, actually, of the Somaliland region in East Africa. And Mike Pompeo, who was the former Secretary of State, and that was under Trump's first term. And Pompeo is a very devout evangelical Christian, and so is Cruz, and they're combining the two things, where they're talking about the rights of the people of Southeast Nigeria, and also this issue again of protecting Christians. So yeah, they've got a lot of sway within the Republican Party, and a lot of this stuff, Charles, is about sentiment as much as anything else. It's often free from, shall we say, established facts and evidence. It's a sense that these are evangelical Christians who put that belief above all else. And the Biafran lobbyists have been extremely effective over probably 20 years, working through the religious right in the US, which brings together a lot of these evangelical groups, and they're big financiers of the Republican Party. And as the Republican Party has moved to the right, so have they. And they've become a big mobilizer of votes for the Republican parties. So there are people who are evangelical Christians who may not like the look of Donald Trump and his various comments about women and all the rest of it, but they bury that concern for the greater good, which they say is the man is for Christians. He's for evangelical Christians, and in that case, we're going to give him our support. So Trump, the evangelical base is absolutely critical for Trump. And that's, I think, it accounts for some of the success of the Biafra lobby in the US.
Well, that's a very illuminating assessment from you. And in that context, Patrick, I mean, is there a risk that fringe or poorly sourced claims could begin to shape US foreign policy towards Nigeria?
I think there's going to be no substitute for an effective state-led diplomatic operation with people like, Yusuf Togo, your foreign minister, who is widely respected in Europe and the United States, and Nuhu Rabadu, the national security advisor, and the top-ranking diplomatic cohort. And I think it's really that's what's going to make the difference. Certainly not lobbyists. And I think American governments, Western governments in general, want to see that sort of level of engagement, both with the officials, even with the media, in fact, pushing back when they see, I've been in journalism a while, some countries push back immediately, like Rwanda or whatever. They don't like what you're writing, they'll push back hard. They'll contact you and complain about it, pick you up on issues and say that's fact is wrong. Why did you print that? We want an apology and all the rest of it. It's kind of activist approach to image making. And the only credible people to lead that kind of activist approach are the nationals from that country. They're top officials and skilled diplomats to get that point across. And I think that's where Nigeria has been missing in action. And it sort of led to this Trump campaign. And now it seems to have provoked a reaction in Abuja, which is to engage more and to work more closely with the officials in Washington.
So given where things are with that and the way that you clearly sort of assessed it just now, what are the risks for Nigeria when competing domestic actors take their battles to foreign capitals, especially Washington?
I think the national view is it's dangerous. I mean, there is a kind of unwritten rule that domestic politics stops at the border. I mean, that's the US rule. To some extent, it's the rule in Britain, although I think Britain is getting increasingly ill-disciplined on that one. That is to say, if you're in the Labour Party or the Tory Party in Britain, you don't go to France and start slagging off, your Tory MP. You don't go to France and start slagging off the Labour Prime Minister. You're not meant to do that. You're meant to keep your battles within your national boundaries. It looks bad if you've got, sure, you're going to have critics, but if they are another party, for example, in the Nigeria sense, I guess, if someone from the Labour Party turned up in Washington and started, holding meetings and condemning President Tinubu, something they could easily do in Nigeria, but it wouldn't be seen as a good way to run a campaign in the States. Why are you criticizing your own leadership abroad? You should be doing that. You should be organizing at home. So I think that's the danger with that. And I think it is a shame. I guess you could say that the Christian lobbyists are kind of a pressure group as much as a political party. I mean, they don't, as I understand it, the particular group that's hired the lobbyists is not going to be putting up candidates in the 2027 elections or anything like that. It's simply putting its demand to the US authorities directly, support us because we deserve self-rule, which is, in the terms of how the international non-governmental sector operates, I guess it's legitimate. I don't see the US buying into that, but it will certainly proffer support, and it could create problems for the Nigerian government, as we've seen. After Nigeria was declared a place of concern for the protection of Christians, if they started to impose sanctions because of that, obviously it would make life much more difficult for the Nigerian government. And I think that's another reason, the concern about possibility of sanctions, why the Tinubu administration acted pretty quickly after Trump made his initial statement.
Well, let me pick you up on that further about the potential problems. I mean, could this lobbying war complicate military cooperation and intelligence sharing, for instance, between Nigeria and the US, or make it less complicated based on what you're seeing at the moment?
I think it's in another kind of realm. The impression I get is that there's a level of professional cooperation between the Nigerian military people, the Nigerian intelligence people, and the US and their counterparts in the US. And once they agreed, once Hegseth met with Nuhu Rabadu and they agreed what the problem was, in this case they I think Rabadu I hear was arguing that there's this group coming across from the tri-point in the Sahel into Sokoto state, and that's a concern. And then the Americans agreed, and they looked at the targets and all the rest of it, and assessed it on that basis. I mean, the questions that have been raised about that is just how effective that raid was, who was hit, what was hit, and to what effect it had on these fighters allegedly coming across from the Sahel. All of those questions are still unanswered, and that doesn't really add confidence all around. But I think it's on a military level in a way. I don't think the political debate between the Biafra groups and the lobbyists now, the DCI group that's lobbying, is going to really damage that military cooperation. I think the only thing that would damage it really seriously would be if the U.S. Congress decided that the Nigerian military was not accountable properly and it was misusing the weapons it was buying from the U.S. And that would obviously then constrain the Nigerian military in some way, and they'd have to look for other support sources of arms supply. I mean, I guess, in the broad run of things, Charles, a lot of this stuff gets snagged by geopolitics. Why is the US doing this in Nigeria? Are they concerned that if they don't supply arms to the Nigerian military, then China would, then Russia would? I mean, Russia has been sweeping across the Sahel, supplying the governments in that area with arms. Maybe they would move in more strongly in Nigeria if the Americans refuse to work with the Nigerians. So I think there's an element of geopolitics, but I don't think that direct competition between the Tinubu government and the Biafran secessionists, I don't think that really affects the military cooperation one way or the other.
And I mean, in the broader run of things that you talked about just a hot second ago, Patrick, I mean, whose narrative would you say is currently winning in Washington? The Nigerian government's or the Separatists? And what evidence do you see of that?
It's really difficult within the Trump administration to state clearly and categorically what narrative is winning, because it's there was a talk under Obama. People used to talk about a team of rivals. I mean, under Trump, it's a team of sort of businessmen and competitive entrepreneurs all the time. And sure, you've got someone like Cruz who stood against Trump for the presidential nomination. And, there's some sort of animosity between the two. Trump used to call him Lying Ted and things like that. But Cruz is an important Republican senator. As I said, he chairs the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. That's powerful. And he's very pro-Biafra. Yet I see no signs that Rubio shares his views. Rubio is also right-wing, religious. I guess sort of evangelical too, but takes a different view on Biafra. So I get Rubio is foreign Secretary of State. He's also National Security Advisor. And Hegseth is also extremely close to Trump. And he was the main interlocutor with Rabadu. So I guess in terms of power politics, Hegseth and Rubio are on the Abuja, on the Tinubu side for now. And they've supplied the weapons. Apparently, the AFRICOM statement yesterday said there's a shipments of weapons coming to the Nigerian military via AFRICOM. So you've got to say that they're winning the narrative. But I don't think the Biafran lobbyists are going to give up. I think they're going to be there pushing their agenda. And who knows? I mean, you could see some concessions being made. People are talking about the fate of Nnamdi Kanu and stuff like that. So I think in the battle of the big power, I think the top officials in Abuja have managed to hold the top officials under Trump to their line for now. But I'm saying, the way the Trump administration works, as they say on the Moluwe in Lagos, no condition is permanent.
Indeed. And that's a good way to end the chat, Patrick. It shows you're a man with an ear to the ground and his feet firmly sort of staunched on this country. Thank you very much indeed. Patrick Smith is the editor-in-chief of Africa Confidential. He's also editor-in-chief of the Africa Report, and he was talking to me on the line there from London. Thank you ever so much.